Mosab Aputoha. We deserve a better death. We deserve a better death. Our bodies are disfigured and twisted, embroidered with bullets and shrapnel. Our names are pronounced incorrectly on the radio and TV. Our photos, plastered onto the walls of our buildings, fade and grow pale. The inscriptions on our gravestones disappear, covered in the feces of birds and reptiles. No one waters the trees that give us shade to our graves. The blazing sun has overwhelmed our rotting bodies. Hello, dear guests. Welcome to the second program of the last day of the Bookstan Festival. Now we have the topic, Holocaust Diaries, Testimonies on the Banality of Evil. In conversation with AMIRA Haas and EMIL KERENJI is Florence Hartmann.
It is the first time that Hannah Levy's diary from Bergen-Belsen is published in the language it was written. Hannah Levy was born into a Jewish family in Sarajevo in 1913. And she studied in Belgrade. She was captured by the German occupation forces in Montenegro and spent months in the Gestapo jail in Cetinje before she was sent to Bergen-Belsen, which means to death. Today, her diary is a testimony on how to resist to normalization of evil. It is a testimony on of a struggle against the barbarism, and not only about victims and perpetrators. We go through parts of the diary to expose that. And it's a testimony of her courageous effort to salvage from a form of solidarity out of the abyss of selfish individualism that's engulfed inmates also living in the hell of Bergen-Belsen. She survived hell, and we will have you, AMIRA, thank you for being here. You are Hannah's daughter, and you are yourself a very strong woman, and the only, if you correct me, but we see you as the only Israeli journalist living and writing. Jewish, okay, Jewish Israeli journalist living and writing from the occupied territories. You have made a fantastic introduction and forwards for the book, for the by-book edition, addressing the meaning of Holocaust for Israelis and Palestinians today. Your father was also a survivor from the Holocaust. You don't call the Holocaust Holocaust, you prefer to call it differently, and you will tell us. And you are a witness to the brutal ongoing assault on Gaza, and you write with clarity about that. And your mother was writing also with clarity about her experience in hell. So we have so many questions to ask you about the book and about yourself also, and the link between both. Emil, correct me if I don't pronounce well your name. KERENJI? Okay, right. You're born in Novi Sad. You're living in the US. You're a professor of history and specialize in the history of Holocaust in Yugoslavia. And your research focuses on the relationship of genocidal violence, I'm stressed, I'm sorry, against Jew and the violence, nationalizing regional policy of state allies in Germany, is it right?
More or less, yes, thank you.
So you're correct. So that's why I stopped.
It's from the website. Yeah, I'm a historian of World War II and the Holocaust in Yugoslavia, so
okay,
yeah,
perfect.
for this panel.
So that's why I will only give you the floor, and I will stop speaking and making maybe mistakes. But I would like we just locate the story of your mother from the beginning in a way. And what was your mother world as she conveyed to you before she was arrested?
Thank you, Florence. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Emil. I guess she was born not far away from here. I don't know where. I know very little. Now I realize it. But it's extremely touching for me to be here in the city where my mother was born, and in a city that, even though I didn't know the language and I visited only in '77 the first time and was never here with her, it always had the name Sarajevo. And this is an expression I also use in the introduction, like music for me. Because that's how my mother remembered Sarajevo. You would say it's romanticized, but it was before 39, it was the 20s, the second decade of the 19th century, then the third. And for me, Sarajevo was, I will start to, it was a hypothesis. It was not the real thing, because now I realize that my mother gave me only, little snapshots, but it was beautiful. The land was beautiful. The people were very easygoing. That's how I can conclude from her. Now I know that she was talking about the Bosnians, which means the Muslims. Easygoing, maybe the easygoing way that I knew about Gazans, like very, very warm with people and not in a hurry, but then can explode with anger, like I do. You said courageous. I say I'm angry. I'm not courageous. I'm all the time angry, and this is something that you can hear later. This is where she was. She was from a poor Sephardi family, or impoverished Jewish family, Sephardi Jews, who was attracted very early on to the ideas of communism. And one of the people that I think influenced her very early on was her math teacher at elementary school, Marcel Schneider, that now I learned from Lamia of the By book that there is a street named after him here. So it was also for me some kind of a connection. So that's when she was first attracted to these ideas that accompanied her later on. And it was one Yugoslavia. It was one, you could say, greater Yugoslavia. For me, she was a Yugoslav. She was not Bosnian. For me, she spoke Yugoslav. I never grew up knowing the differences that you have been living so tragically over the past decades. I was never really aware of it. Was it her short-sightedness, or was it something typical Jewish, that the Jews were the true Yugoslavs? Because the whole Yugoslavia, or the whole Balkans, welcomed there after they were expelled from Spain in 1492. So in a way, and she saw this place as her place. She saw this country, the whole country, as her place. And when she went to study in Belgrade, it was natural, as it is natural for you to go from Sarajevo to another city in Bosnia, I guess. She went to study there, and she was always affiliated with she was close to the communists. She was expecting the world to change for the better, and she saw herself part of this movement for a change for the better in her homeland, which was Yugoslavia. And then, if you read the book and you see the introduction that I'm writing, the reason that I'm asking how come I was not born here, or to that matter in Belgrade, but was born in Jerusalem. And this is for me a question that always accompanies me while I live among Palestinians. I've been living among Palestinians for the last 30 years and more. And 3 years I lived in Gaza, and I'm still very attached to Gaza and people in Gaza. And now I live in the West Bank, and it's a question that bothers me all the time. Confronting the genocide that Israel is now perpetuating against the people of Gaza, and the atrocities that Israel and the very, very deliberate and political atrocities that Israel has been committing over the past 70 years against the Palestinians. So this is a question that I'm asking myself, and also my mother did when she was alive, and would if she were alive today.
Thank you. And we come back to those connections, and thank you for being so, in a personal way, for telling us all that. It's, can you, Emil, please give us a little the context of Hannah's arrest and that? Yeah.
Yes. So Hannah, as Amira said, was living in Belgrade in the second half of the 1930s. She left the city to go to Montenegro to teach in an elementary school, I think in 1939. And that's where in Danilovgrad, which is a town in Montenegro where she was living, she basically where the outbreak of World War II in Yugoslavia found her. In this grand division of the Yugoslav territories, the Danilovgrad, as a lot of other parts of Montenegro, became occupied by Italy, by fascist Italian army. However, already in June of 1941, the partisan forces liberated the town, and it was basically free for a free partisan territory until the end of that year, where the combined forces of the Chetniks and the Germans and Italians managed to push the partisan army from Montenegro into Herzegovina. And then I think I grew up with this the narrative of the offensives and this, you know, the story of World War II in Yugoslavia. But initially it was in Montenegro where that first part of the uprising took place. And so the Italians, of course, had a much more lenient policy towards the Jews. There are academic debates whether it's because the Italians are not anti-Semitic, or it was a little more complex set of circumstances and politics. I subscribe to the latter story, which is too long to be told here. But the fact is that Jews under Italian rule were safer for a while than the Jews in other parts of Yugoslavia that were either occupied by Germany or controlled by the Ustaše in the independent state of Croatia. And so after the fall of fascist Italy in 1943, in September, the Germans occupied the Italian territory in Montenegro where the Italian army basically collapsed. And that is the time around which Hannah was arrested, and then spent some time in the Gestapo prison in Cetinje, after which she was deported to Bergen-Belsen.
Yeah, as you said, it was different in some places and everything, and we will come back, but just tell us, even if it's the end of the story, at one point she learns, after she escaped or survived, let's say, better Bergen-Belsen, she learned about how her mother and sister survived. So it was not survived. No, they were murdered. Sorry. So it was more or less at the same time when she was arrested that her mother and sister were murdered. Can you tell us so that we don't come back?
Yes, that's a little before 1943, actually. So they when Hannah left Belgrade, her mother and sister stayed in Belgrade. In April of 1941, the German army occupied the bigger part of what today is Serbia. Belgrade was, and that territory was ruled by the German military administration. And because of the uprising there was the Communist Party of Yugoslavia under Tito in July of 1941 called for an armed uprising of the Yugoslav peoples against the occupation. By the summer of 1941, there was a widespread uprising in which basically the partisans and the communists were gaining an upper hand. The Germans were unable to suppress this. In the fall of 1941, the partisans liberated a large swath of territory in western Serbia around Užice, and which was later captured again by the Germans and the Chetniks. But basically this uprising and the severity of the uprising in Serbia in the summer of 41 led to a very strict German reprisal policy where they started shooting 100 hostages, civilians, for each German soldier who was killed and 50 for each German soldier who was wounded. And because of the uprising and because the Germans on the one hand wanted to suppress the communist uprising, but on the other hand, they also wanted to pacify the population and didn't want to antagonize the Serbian population. So in order to meet these hostage quotas, they started disproportionately shooting Jews and Roma along with Serbian civilians. So by the end of 1941, practically all Jewish men had been executed in these reprisal shootings. I think we all know the biggest massacres that the Germans committed were in Kragujevac and in Kraljevo in the fall of 1941. But basically all Jewish men were executed by the end of 1941. And then the question arose what to do with Jewish women and children who remained concentrated in Belgrade after that period. And the Germans founded a concentration camp for the remainder of the Jewish population in the fairgrounds, Sajmište, across the Sava River in Belgrade. Today it's like in the center of Novi Beograd, but at that time it was outside the city of Belgrade, and deported all the Jewish women and children there in December of 1941. And if we keep in mind the larger kind of timeline of the German genocide against the Jews, that was also the time, the end of 1941, the beginning of 1942, when the German leadership decided that genocide rather than expulsion or deportation to the east, that actually genocide was the quote-unquote solution to the, again, quote, Jewish question. And so the local German leadership requested a gas van from Berlin, which Berlin, of course, sent, and these women and children, some 6,000 people who were in this camp, among them Hannah's mother and sister, were killed in the gas van. by the end of the spring of 1942. So that's how her sister and her mother were murdered.
Yeah.
And I can say something that, first of all, I mean, the men who were murdered by the Nazis as retaliation, we know that they would have been anyway murdered. So with a rebellion, without a rebellion, they would have been murdered by the Germans, so German Nazis. So that's one thing. And another thing, I don't think, my mother never told me about, I mean, she got the impression that my grandmother and my aunt were murdered in Auschwitz. And I discovered only later, after she was dead, that it was, that's one of my cousins who told me that they were murdered in or suffocated to death in the gas vans that the German occupation used here. Who knows? And I never really had, I know that it is possible to check these things, but I was never really very interested in the details, these details. So it can be either or, but they have perished.
Yeah, and we should be careful about Saimishte because it's a small memorial, but there is a project with Expo 2027 which could just make it disappear. So just by en passant. There is Hannah starts her diary with, my whole being seems paralyzed, and with each passing day I feel more apathetic about the world outside, less suited to life as it is now. If our goals and political aims don't materialize, if the world remains as it is now, if new social relations don't emerge and substantially change human nature, well then, I will finally become and forever remain a clumsy, incompetent, damned creature, a failure. August 16, 1944. This first sentence sets really the way of the diary. There is a lot of political view on it, and it makes it really unique. And we'll go through that. At one, just to follow the story first, on a little later, because that's not the way she's starting the diary. She's only on the date of September 8, when she's already a few months in Bergen-Belsen. She's speaking about how she arrived. I'm incapable at this time of recalling anything from the past except what we lived through most recently, the trip they made us take to get here. What an ordeal. 2 weeks in cattle cars. So tell us how you learned about the fact that the diary existed and the language was Yugoslav, and you had to look for that original language version.
Well, it's actually, we can talk about a span of, 65 years that I was born into knowing that my mother was in this hell. I also knew that she was a partisan because this is something that she was about to join the partisans. She participated in one battle as a paramedic with the partisans in Montenegro. And then, so she was a terrorist, according to the authorities. And in the criteria used by Israel, against the Palestinians who fight today in Gaza. So she was a terrorist, and she decided to join the terrorists. And then when the German occupation, when it was the German occupation, and then she was asked by the Jewish community not to join because they were afraid that the Germans will retaliate against every Jew. she already knew by then, it was 43, she already knew by then that I mean, death is the destiny of all Jews. It was a conclusion, I guess. It was not, if not a documented knowledge, it was a very logical conclusion, but she couldn't bear it on her conscience to rejoin the partisans, and that's why she found herself then in the prison and then in Bergen-Belsen. So this is something that I grew up with. I don't remember when I was told this for the first time. And also the diary, and the stories in the diary, I mean, the testimonies in the diary. And one of them, which I remembered, which I was always very proud of, you know, they were in the barracks, they were getting some dirty water called soup, and with some radish or something in it. And there were people who always got the upper hand and distributed to the powerful ones or whatever, or to the privileged ones in the barracks. Everybody was a skeleton, but still there were some. And they distributed unevenly. And then she and some others protested and decided to take over this distribution of the so-called soup, so that it will be distributed evenly. And one of the collaborators with the Germans, one of the couples, shouted at her and said, "What is this? Do you want to build here a Soviet?" So this is one of the memories that I'm very proud of. And I think that they told me also to show an ideological way that about equality, even in these darkest places, that you have to fight for dignity, and you can fight for human dignity, even in the darkest places. This was the message. So it's not that my parents told me, this is how you behave, but it was clear that this is how you can behave. So there is kind of an existential decision how to behave, also in the darkest places. And for years she would tell me that until she always looks at people and she asks herself how this or that person would have behaved, that she does judge people about how she thinks or how they would have behaved in these terrible times. That also in the darkest place, you are allowed to be judgmental about people who do harm to others. So I grew up with this. I think I read the translation into Hebrew quite early, but I'm always in a sort of denial. If you ask me something, I don't remember the diary. So when I had to work on the diary when it was published in English, and then and now for the introduction here, I suffer when I read. I don't do it happily. So with each time that I'm asked to, it's not easy for me until today. And I always read and I discover something new that, it's not new, but it's something that I buried and do not want to remember. And then the first time that I was approached by someone with a very logical request to publish in Bosnian or in ex-Yugoslavia or whatever was EMIL. I didn't know him. I got a letter. It was at the beginning of the second Intifada. It means it was 2003 or 5 or something.
Something like that.
Something like that. And I get an email from somebody that I don't know, but who knows me because I'm writing for Haaretz. And he says he thinks it's very important to be published in the original language. And I don't remember, we didn't have, we looked. We found somebody, a publisher, but they didn't have the money, something like that. And years have passed, and it didn't come out. I was also reluctant because, as I told you, I was busy with our own atrocities, so I didn't have the energy, much energy for this. But it was a thought. And the years have passed, and then chance brings to me, other people. Damir Shagoli, who is here, of Sarajevo, and Rémi Ourdin, the French journalist. And they have the same suggestion, but I didn't have the original text. So we thought of translating it, which is very weird, to translate it, but I didn't have it. My mother died in 2001. I didn't have the original. And I mean, in the original language, even though it was, she printed it at some time in Serbo-Croat when I was 18 with some other languages. And then I was here 2 years ago for an exhibition that Damir and Rémi Ourdin organized about Sarajevo and the path of humanity that Sarajevo can teach the world. And at the opening, there were some people from the Jewish community. I was asked to say some words. I said, and then a woman approached me, and she said, I have your mother's text. She visited my mother in the 90s in Tel Aviv, and my mother gave her as a present, they gave her a copy of what she printed, my mother, what she herself printed in 45 when she returned to Belgrade. She had the little notebook, which was falling apart, and she typed what she had written. I guess she made some little, she gave some titles or whatever. She didn't look at it as a historical document, but more as a personal document that she wanted to share with friends. And I remember that she told me, I wrote it, it's easier for me to write it in Latin letters, but I signed my name in Cyril, because it was in Belgrade, in Cyrillic. This is, I remembered before I saw the text. And she did it, and she gave it to people around her, to friends, and friends from the Communist Party. And the reaction that she received was that, oh, don't look at the past, look at the future. It's not really important this, now we have the future to work on. So I think that this started to be the first message how different her life was from the life of other Yugoslavs who were not Jewish.
If I can just say something about the importance of this document in Bosnian. As Amira said, I was very eager to have this published in the original language, and for two main reasons. One, of course, I'm a scholar of the Holocaust, and I think that diaries from camps and from that period more generally are very important historical documents. And this one is one of the most important ones for me, because I think not only does it document and reflect on the everyday life in the camp, and Belsen was one of the most notorious German camps. It was not, technically, it was not a death camp, the killing center like Auschwitz or Treblinka or Sobibor, but it was a place where the neglect for Jewish life and just the total indifference towards Jewish humanity allowed tens of thousands of people to die in horrible circumstances. And so we have a very important testimony about this camp, and not only in general, I think in worlds, you know, in English, in all languages, this is very important. But I think to have something like that in our language, in the original language, in the language in which it was written, and by somebody who is one of us, who was from this region and from these areas here, I think it's important for us and for our people of our language and our children to be able to read this, because today there are very few things in our language that speak about evil in this way, and I think that was my kind of urge and the most important reason why I thought it would be really, really important to have this in this language. And I'm very happy that it finally came out.
Yeah, because it's a testimony of the camp, but it's also about the social relation inside, and what we mentioned earlier. For instance, in August 1944, she wrote, people from different social classes are crammed together here, but it is the standard petit bourgeois type that predominates. There are also a few typical capitalist individuals, moderate, decadent types. In general, everyone continues to display mean and petty habits, selfishness, and narrow-mindedness. Yeah, it's how you survive this normalization to everyone, normalization of evil, and as she, when she described the train coming on, she is describing also the people on the way of the train, just wearing nice dresses and being, people are transported as cattle in completely hermetical trains, and then people are just living this contrast between everything. And at the end, in order for us to go to some specific question, because you have you will tell us also how she lived the end of Yugoslavia, but just how she shortly we should recall when the German, pressured by the advance of the Allied, started to empty the camp. She was due to be transported to Theresienstadt, and she succeeded to be killed there, absolutely, and she succeeded, luckily, to escape, and she has this long walk until some kind of security, and then later on survival and some freedom. Can you?
She didn't really, it was not a premeditated escape. I think that one of the things that keeps striking me is how meticulously the German Nazi regime wanted to fulfill, was determined to fulfill the goal of murdering all Jews. So even in April 45, when their defeat was certain, really certain, the authorities of the death camp of Bergen-Belsen had to fulfill their mission, which is to send Jews to death. So there were those who remained who were already dying in the camp itself, and those who were still somehow half alive, like my mother, were put in trains that would go away from the approaching British army so that they can fulfill the mission of murdering them. I mean, this is still today, it's hard to stomach. And we have to understand that there is something that wars, and this I keep saying to both Palestinian and Israeli friends, wars and the use of arms do serve a political goal. But at a certain moment, the war changes something in one's minds. And this is true about all sides who are participating in the war. And then you cannot calculate the madness that is involved in this war. And I cannot say but that this madness brought my mother into this train to be murdered in Theresienstadt a few days before the capitulation. So she was on this train with the other thousands of skeletons, and because the train was slow, because there were the Soviet army was on the one side, the British were on the other side, so it advanced slowly and sometimes stopped, and sometimes the German guards would let or would not protest when people went down and took some water and looked for potatoes. And my mother went, she was still able to do it. she went down to look for some potatoes, and there was a group of Yugoslavs, and that's what she always told me, Yugoslavs. So Yugoslav prisoners of war who were in the area working probably as forced labor in the villages, approaching, are there Yugoslavs here? Are there Yugoslavs here? That's how she wrote, and she said, she never said Bosnians, I don't know, maybe they said Serbs, I don't know. But for her, it was always Yugoslavs. Are the Yugoslavs here? And they saw my mother and a friend of somebody, another woman. She said they were afraid to look at us because they were like skeletons. And they said, come with us to the village and we'll give you some potatoes. They went to the village, German village, still under German rule. And they got a sack of potatoes, and she took it in order to distribute among the other passengers in the same train. And she arrived to the station, and the train was gone. So it was not her choice. She wanted to go back to the train because she was already, she said, I'm with these people. I mean, she says that their mind was blurred and then they weren't thinking clearly. So I think she didn't think of escaping. She had typhus before in the camp itself. And then she remained. I remember that she told me she was hiding and she saw the German army. It's also one of my childhood memories, adopted memories, that the German army was escaping. Maybe it was later, maybe my memory, it was not exactly on that day, but I really see I really see them now. That's how the vehicles and the soldiers all running, escaping, and she didn't think she would exist, be alive for this. She went back to the village. She was afraid of the German woman who offered her to stay. The woman was afraid of her. She went to sleep in the barn or something like that. Luckily, she understood that she shouldn't eat immediately everything that she had. The next morning, the village was occupied, not liberated, occupied by the Soviet army. And there was one small soldier that she told me who looked at her, who spoke to her as if she were German. But the officer probably understood that such a skeleton could not be a German woman. And then he told her in Russian, Germania Varshaya. Germany is yours. So of course but that was the liberation. And this is also one of my childhood memories, Germania Varshaya. It's not a territorial victory, but it's the feeling that she had at that time that she was free. And then she thought that it's possible, that freedom is possible. Then she started, like millions of others, walking around, and I think that she describes this in an interview that she gave to a German journalist and who became a friend of ours, Eike Geisel. I mean, it was really freedom. So it was not freedom, it was the certainty that freedom is possible. And with this certainty that freedom and positive change and humanist change and equality are possible, that explained her optimism of this month, that she was wandering around in ruined Germany, meeting Germans and non-Germans and Italians, and she met a group of Italians that also is a very, she said real workers and comrades, they were communists or whatever. So I don't know what of this is her romanticism, what of this is true, but that's how I grew up. She went with them, they protected her. I sometimes want to fantasize that she had a little affair with someone, but this is another thing that she told me. And they didn't speak anything but Italian, so she translated. She knew Italian, so she translated for them Italian and German and other languages if necessary. She was this kind of typical Jewish polyglot. And And they parted, and then she went to Belgrade with all this certainty that socialist change is not only possible, it's there. A new world is there, like she opens the diary. And she opens the diary, you know, at a certain point, I think there was an Israeli, I forgot her name, an Israeli historian who lives in the States, who once wrote to me and doubted that the diary was written as a diary. She said it cannot be so clear. It's probably that she wrote it afterwards, so it's not a diary. You know, this kind of meticulousness of American, I don't know, doctors, that everything has to be proven. And at some point, you know, like, so I went over and read it, and I said it's impossible because you see the change in the language. The first paragraphs or chapters are written by somebody who just arrived. So she's still in the old world. And later on, you see that it changes. So my mother was not a manipulative person, and I don't think she wrote well, but I don't think she would have created this difference of the first entries of the diary and the later entries of the diary. And with this hope, she came to Belgrade, and she meant to stay in Belgrade, in new Yugoslavia.
But she didn't. No. And why? And then she had a new hope when she stepped in Haifa.
Look, when I was 5 years old, you know, my parents were I grew up in the communist family. So it was like, as I told you yesterday, there are three things that I don't remember when I knew first in my life. My name, like everybody, we don't remember when we know that our name is our name. The second thing was what I don't call the Holocaust, but the Holocaust. And the third thing was communism. So these were the three
certainties of your life.
Certainties of my life, yes. Name, communism, and this is what happened here. And so it was a very, and I know, I mean, I've never been at the Communist Party because very early on I was aware of how it evolved in the Soviet world. But in Israel, to be a communist was to be a dissident, was to be against the regime, against the repression. And both my parents came to Israel, non-Zionists, even anti-Zionists, you could say, and they found themselves in Israel. And the first thing they did, separately, they didn't know each other. They stepped out of the boat. The first thing they did, they joined the Communist Party. So the Communist Party was kind of a family. It was, for me, the substitute of the family that I did not have. The family that was murdered, and then also the family that did remain and came to Israel, but was ideologically different. So we did not, it was not a real family for me, because they were Zionists and we were not. So when I was aware of these things very early on, that my parents always quarrel with their remaining family because over what Israel is. And this, I'm talking about the late 50s or the early 60s. So I think I was 5 or 6 or something like this. And I asked my parents, how come you are here, you came to Israel, and you are not Zionists? I mean, I'm surprised today to remember this. And I do remember. And I know I'm not inventing it. And as I say, I was old enough to ask this question. I was not old enough to hear the answer. And I discovered the answer over the years when because also what I didn't understand when the Holocaust was a certainty of life, it was how impossible it is to understand it at the end. When you are a child, you accept it as fact of life. When you grow older, you understand how impossible it is. Just as I am now, I know everything about, or not everything, but I follow closely what Israel is committing in Gaza, but deep in me philosophically, I cannot really understand. I mean, I know the details, I can give you a just from my sleeve a whole analysis of Israeli policies, but when I go into the bottom of it, it's beyond my comprehension. So this is the answer why my parents arrived to a country they did not believe in the ideology, because it was so impossible for Jews when they returned from concentration camps, and they actually discovered not only that the whole family is gone and that all the Jewish friends are gone. Also, my mother had Jewish friends, and they are gone. They were murdered. And not the way that non-Jewish Yugoslavs were killed. I mean, you could be a partisan and be killed in prison or in battle, but the retaliation was not necessarily against everybody. Though here, we know that here the German repression was as harsh as in other places, yeah, well. And I think it's also the fact that they were not really fully accepted here as part of the society. They saw themselves, my father in Romania, my mother in Yugoslavia, many other Jews in France, in Holland, in Poland for sure. They came, they wanted to return home. And actually home, the societies at home told them, you are not part of this place. Because this is something that happened during the German occupation. It changed the nature, in many places, it changed the nature of local, hostilities toward Jews. So maybe it was prejudice in the past, but it was never or anti-Semitism of disappearance, that the Jews should have disappeared. Maybe, but maybe in Eastern Europe more at some point.
They were not supposed to come back.
But during the German times, the Jews were taken as somebody who is totally alien and foreign, more than the developments of some decades before. And I think that this is what my parents both felt and pushed them with a stupid belief that there will be revolution in the Middle East and revolution in Israel-Palestine, and refugees would return, and we'll all live happily ever after. I mean, that's part of this anomalies of and hallucinations of communist people in their times. But this is why I was not born here.
Yeah, and that's the fourth world, which has not been exactly as they expected. Which collapsed. The third was Yugoslavia, her third world. And so tell us, how do you remember in the 90s? Because everything you're saying, and that's applied for Israel or Palestine, applied for Yugoslavia too. And so how did she react? And you mentioned earlier, I don't want to compare, we say we will not make parallels, and each... there is no competition in hell. And the soup in Bergen-Belsen, we don't know how was the soup. We're not contemporaneous. We know through survivors how was what they call the soup in Omarska or other places. So how your mother look at it?
You said the words, she told me at a some years before, some month maybe before she died, that all her worlds were destroyed. And one, of course, the Jewish world here in Yugoslavia, and the second thing was the socialist world, for the obvious reasons, and then Israel, that was never really she was never really patriotic. She even left Israel. She tried to de-emigrate in '82 after the massacre in Sabra and Shatila. She tried to go back and live in Europe, but she was already 70, so it was not so easy, and she returned after 10 years. And then Yugoslavia. I think she refused to know. I mean, she knew, but very, very on the surface. she couldn't stomach it. She and and my aunt, a sister-in-law, they always told me, we wake up in the morning and we wake up with this heavy, it was 92, 93, we wake up with this heaviness on our chest. We don't know, that's the first thing that they feel, the heaviness on the chest. And then they remember, oh, Yugoslavia. So I was at that time, in these years, I was in Gaza. So also for me, it was too much to absorb and to go into details. But I think it's also psychological. It's psychological that I cannot, I had to deal with things in Gaza, which was not hellish like today, but still I was warning about Israeli policies already then, and it was during so-called peace process, the big lie, and I knew about Yugoslavia, but I really did not enter into details. And for my mother, it was much more difficult. Really, it was torture. It was not. I remember still she was in France, and I visited her. I think it was 91, and we called my nephew, the son of her sister, who was alive still here in Sarajevo, and he said, no, nothing will happen in Bosnia. Everything is fine. We are not like the others. We are all brothers and everything. So she was really reassured that, it will all be okay in Sarajevo. And I don't think she spoke much about it. I think that it's like, Palestinians who did not speak about the Nakba, and many Jewish families who did not speak about the Holocaust. She only, I once wanted, I had a CD with Balkan music. She couldn't. I wanted her to listen. She said, I cannot. It was so for her, the world that is gone.
But you were listening.
I was listening it before I knew Sevda or knew the word Sevda, and now Damir Damir Imamovic is not here now, but he was. I discovered Sevda once when I was going from my home in Ramallah, and I had something to do in Hebron. And on the road, I listened to a radio program that introduced Sevda. So I wrote about it for Haaretz in a column. And then some friends started, and first time I heard his name, Damir Imamovic, on the radio, because in Israel you have people from very many traditions and very good pluralism in music, not in other things, but in music. So it was, I think that some Israelis were even playing, or I don't know, and Damir Imamovic was mentioned, and so that's how I discovered him, and I met him 2 years ago when I was here, and so it was, but it is because of her I listen. I mean, because of what she told me, I also inherited the pain, of course. I mean, other than the pain that I have when I listen to people here, or when I now read and dare to read. It took me time to dare to read things, and still I'm always discovering something new that shocks me. I'm not sure I want to know all the details, because I feel there is the heart has some limitations about how much evil to absorb, or not to absorb, but to contain.
Yes. You have a fantastic introduction to the book about some of what you said to us today, and one part is I don't have the English one, and so In Bosnian, yeah. Ovi su reči napisani i potpisani krajem maja 2024. godine, dok Izrael već 8. mesec provodi rat sa ciljem istrebljenja Palestinaca u pojasu Gaze. And yeah, you can understand.
I don't know, unfortunately.
No, I'm sure you understand.
No, this book.
No, it's just how you started
That you're writing
first part,
this as it's already the 8th
In
month of
May,
extermination of the Palestinians in Gaza.
Yeah, it's your words, and I would like to read the 2 other pages, but you have to buy the book. Sorry. No, what I want to say is that that's you. You are, for me, so related to your mother in a way, which is well, some kind of normal things, but each one your own persons. But there are so many bridges between you, and the clarity we spoke about your mother's diaries and the clarity of your writing, and these 2 pages, which is 2 in the books, but. On current situation in Gaza are absolutely beautiful. That's not something we can read in many places. That's something you can find by reading Haaretz, and especially your articles. And do you mind if we speak a little about now? Most of it will be at warm. Because you have different session over there, which will be focused on the current situation. So you are not leaving Sarajevo. You are still here and still speaking about your work. But give us some of it for us now, please.
Look, as I said before, and this is really a lesson that I have from my experiences, and also what I knew and learned from my parents. The war is any use of arms is and this is not an invention, our invention, is a policy in other carrying out existing policy in other ways. But then it starts to have a crazy, uncontrollable logic of its own. So Israel is carrying out a policy. It did not wait for the 7th of October in order to have a policy of thwarting the Palestinian project for national independence. It's something that has accompanied Israel since it was established in the land of the Palestinians, and for reasons that I described here, that it's a settler colonial movement but also a settler colonial movement that would not have succeeded without the Nazi regime and the genocide against the Jews. That's my analysis, and not only mine, I guess. And then when there was a chance, when the Palestinians were ready in the late 80s, during the first Intifada uprising, and then in the beginning of the 90s, were clearly saying to the world, we accept a compromise which is very painful for us Palestinians, a state in 22% of historical Palestine. So the world was thinking that this is the time when it is feasible. You know, the Soviet Union was falling apart. South Africa was on the path to be released from apartheid. So the proxy wars of the Cold War have ended. So it seemed possible. And then there was, there was a peace process, so-called peace process, first in Madrid negotiations, then Oslo negotiations. So parallel to these peace negotiations, Israel continued to do everything possible to thwart, not to allow the establishment of a Palestinian state. By very simple means, settlements. You get control over the land. You separate people from each other. The siege over Gaza started long before Hamas came to power in 2006. This is a myth that both Israel and Hamas are developing, that the siege started with Hamas. No, it started in 91 and it was not lifted when the PA, Palestinian Authority, was established. So Israel has an aim not to allow Palestinians to have a state even in 20% of the land. And this is very clear for me, the reason. Because if there were a Palestinian state, something that we were calling for from the 70s, I mean the Israeli left wing, which is comprised of many Palestinians and people outside. Because if we had two states, and there would have been peace between the two states, Israel would not have had the pretexts to repress the Palestinians in Israel, to prevent them from having equal rights. It would not have had the pretext to divide or to treat differently Jews of Mizrahi origin. It would not have had the privileges that come to Israel as a military power. This is from the negative side. The positive side would have seen we can live together as two neighboring states. So the logic would have been changed. And Israel did everything possible that the logic, the nationalist, national, uninational logic would prevail. So things only deteriorated because the more you repress the Palestinians, as we know in other places, the more they resist. So they resist by not accepting Israeli dictates, and they resist also by the choice of arms, which I deplore because I think it is the choosing arms is in our epoch, and with what Israel proved how destructive it can be, it is dangerous for the existence of the fighting people, not of Israel. It is dangerous for the people themselves, as we see now happening in Gaza. So maybe one of the things that I'm trying to say since the beginning of this, what did not start as a genocide, but evolved immediately as a genocide, and had, from the very early on, we got the warnings that it can be very quickly turned into a genocide. So my difficulty as a journalist is to state things not in a binary way. And this is very difficult. I tell to Israelis what I think it is. They take it as if I endorse Hamas tactics and atrocities of the 7th of October. But I can be against, of course, the murder of of babies and the kidnapping of babies. But at the same time, I can say it is a deplorable response, but to Israeli policies. Then I tell Palestinians, the armed struggle is not that you veneer so much and you adore so much, did not yield results in the last 30 years. On the contrary, you fought in the Second Intifada, it only deepened Israeli settler colonialism. There are all kinds of youngsters in the West Bank who go with arms and shoot at Israeli jeeps, but they don't dedicate all this energy and courage to protect Palestinian farmers vis-a-vis Israeli terrorists, Israeli Jewish terrorists called settlers. So they say, but what do you want? What else can we do? Nothing else has worked for us. Yes, but armed struggle hasn't worked for you either. So maybe cultural fight has worked more. The resilience, the people's resilience and sticking to the land has worked more, has succeeded more in fighting Israeli settler colonialism than your armed struggle. And then they say, no, because armed struggle is sacred. And I hate it. So I hate it, and they think that I say it because I'm an Israeli. And I hear declare, I don't say it because I'm an Israeli. I hate it probably because I'm a feminist, And I see this armed struggle as a very masculinist embrace of a very anatomically dissimilar manifestations to masculinity. And I say it as the daughter of my parents. My father always taught me that when there is war, you cannot tell, I mean, everything can happen. Everything can happen at war that that could not happen in normal times. I don't say peace times because there was never peace here in our place. But so, and I say it also based on my experience. I do see that Palestinians have achieved more in the past 30 years in terms of recognition and in terms of personal and community achievements and appearances in the world than the wars that destroy. And also my experience as an Israeli is that the right wing was waiting for this opportunity. Because the right wing in Israel, the fascist right wing, can do things today that they were calling for in the past. And this is the main thing, is the annihilation. This is hard for me to say it emotionally. But the right wing has been advocating for years the so-called solution of expulsion of Palestinians from the country. So like to complete 1948, and the war gives them the opportunity to accomplish it. So these are the reasons, but unfortunately still we are in this binary reality that I say several things at the same time. One does not exclude the other. But unfortunately, we are in these TikTok times when, or binary times when one thing does exclude the other. So I always have to think 20 times before I say something.
Yeah. And there is also it's complicated, the way for people from outside not to get into the story, or for the international community, so-called international communities, well, let's call it like that, not to take any decision, because it's also from outside one of the part of the situation, which is similar with what happened in the former Yugoslavia also, because
the complicity of the outside world is just drives you mad. The complicity, and where it's possible, when we know, one of the things that I was telling diplomats, foreign diplomats, for years, 30, 20 years, saying that it's going only to lead to worse scenarios. You don't have to be, I'm not a prophet, I don't have a crystal ball, I don't have special powers, but I was warning people before the second Intifada that there will be that things will explode, and I was right. And I was talking, it's not because I have special powers, it's because I live among Palestinians. And I see what Israel, I see, living there, I see what Israel is doing, has been doing. And I was telling diplomats that they have to step in, they have to punish Israel, not to punish, but to say, no, we cannot cooperate with this. This is against our principles. So you Israelis want to continue with this settlement and the occupation and this unbelievable siege on Gaza? Okay, but you cannot come to the Europe like everybody else in the world, or like everybody from a normal world. You will have restrictions. You should put restrictions on Israelis going to Europe. You have to get a visa to fulfill a questionnaire. Did you participate in A, B, C? Are you a settler? Things like that, to tell Israelis that they should pay a price for the occupation. And I'm talking about the normal occupation. And, they would tell me, it's impossible, it's impossible. So I said, for you Europeans, it's easier to imagine that you come and rescue, that you come and give humanitarian aid when, I didn't think about Gaza, but I thought about the West Bank. When Israel expels tens or hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from the West Bank, you can envision yourself distributing water to the refugees, really. Wallahi, that's what I said. than to prevent this from happening. And this is what, till, you see, it makes me so angry.
Yeah, but your anger is good because you turn it into courage of saying everything. Continue, and yeah. Is there any questions?
It was so long.
No. Well.
Over there. There, it's coming, it's coming.
You touched upon the Holocaust and how you don't necessarily refer to it as the Holocaust. So I was just curious if you could explain a bit more. Thank you.
I call it, but it's longer, so it's always very cumbersome to use it in a sentence. I call it the Nazi German industry of murder. I mean, that's how I would, because, and this is, I think, also something that I learned from my mother. If I say Holocaust, it's, you know, also the meaning, the biblical meaning is something like impersonal or unhuman or something, a force of nature, not something that human beings committed. And she told me, my mother, that, so this is from very early on, I don't use the word Shoah and I don't use the word Holocaust. But in a sentence, it's always very difficult to so, yeah, the genocide, it's not a Jewish genocide, it's a genocide Germans perpetrated against Jews, what they did also in Namibia in the beginning of the 20th century. So this is what I would use. But Shoah and Holocaust always disturbed me. My mother, when she published her diary in German in the early 80s, so she told me that high school students asked her, she used to meet with, or to get letters from high school students in Germany, and one of the questions was how Jews could die like this. And she said, no, the question is how Germans could kill like this. So this is also now when I'm talking about Palestinians, I'm angry with the language, I'm always, of victimhood. Because victimhood is not your characteristic, it's not your personality. You are being wronged by Israel. But you are not, you know, when people, you are not by your nature a victim. So it's always a danger when we have this victimology, a victimological language. There is always a danger about it because you don't see the humanity of people, you turn them into the victims. And I think it's a problem. It doesn't mean, again, with my anti-binary language, again, it doesn't mean that I don't see, on the contrary, that I don't see the wrongdoing against him and the repression and the injustice and now the genocide. But it's very important for me to tell, no, I see the people, the human beings, and their nature is not to be victims. And we tend sometimes with this language to make people into victims and forget that there is somebody who is able to treat other human beings like this. And this should be the stress. How you are able to do it, not how you were killed or how you died or how you were wounded, but no, how somebody could do it to you.
It is an issue here in Bosnia, so that's something you should really speak. It's a subject for here.
Can I ask?
They will not tell you that, but it's a topic. You have to get into it, and this time, not here now because we don't have much time.
No, if I can ask you, because yes, it is true that here there is a fetishism for this word, genocide, and everything goes about the word instead of what is being done, which is. But I would like to ask you if you don't, because you used out this term like the machinery and before you mentioned also what was the thing, the total despise against human life in Bergen-Belsen and total, and now. To me, there is still some difference between these two things, which are both horrible. And I would say that what is in Gaza now is the first, about the second, whatever. The Baghdad, the total. There is not yet the machinery which is built with buses or with the total just for destroying massively human lives. For this, maybe the reason between there is a difference between the war of the genocide and the other. But of course, both things are horrible and beyond human imagination and in a scale which is unimaginable. But would it make sense still to make this difference between these two types of approach or not? This is my question. So why to use genocide for both? Thank you.
I think that in every historical period, or if there are similarities, there are many differences as well. So I don't make a comparison one-to-one between. Look, it took Israel 70 years to reach to a point where I can say, and with a lot of emotional difficulty, genocide. But of course, it is not the same like the genocide that the Germans perpetuated. It's not a copy. And the Germans developed it after 10 years or 9 years in power, or 8 years in power, the Nazis. So there is also Hamas vis-à-vis Israel is not like the Jews vis-à-vis Germany, of course not. I can be, and as you heard, I'm very critical of Hamas, and in general the Palestinian cult of what I call the cult of the armed struggle. I'm very much against it. And not, as I said, not as an Israeli. I mean, I understand, I come from this tradition that we as I said, my mother was going to an armed group. But you have to measure so many other things when you decide about such a thing. And certainly in our times, when the weapons can be so destructive of the whole population that you want to liberate. There is no comparison between the weapons and the gap between the weapons that the Palestinians have and the Israelis have as the weapons that were used by the Irish in the beginning of the 20th century against the British. There was much more logic back then in the armed struggle because there was not such a huge difference between the two powers. So these are all calculations that have to be taken out of the romanticism of the armed struggle. And I've had this, I live among Palestinians, and some of them think that I'm a Zionist only because I'm saying this. And some agree with me but cannot say it openly because there is a cult of the armed struggle, not only among Palestinians. Or of the use of arms. So no, it's not the same. I think that also the comparisons with settler colonialism are not exact because the reasons that Israel was established are different than those that brought Australia into being a white country, Western country, in a land of Aboriginal peoples, and New Zealand and Brazil and United States. All these are products of settler colonial drives, and also Israel. But Israel is not the only. This is not the only reason. As I said, without the Holocaust, whatever we call it, the Jews would not have chosen to emigrate to Palestine, or most of them, or the numbers that emigrated to Palestine would not have done so, because Zionism was not popular among the Jews. Only in the 40s, and then after it was understood what was the implication of the Nazi German industry of murder, what it implied, and when people were not accepted, and when the world did not accept refugees. Jewish refugees could not go during the war and after the war. So that's why Jews started to adopt Zionism. But until then, Jews thought that diaspora was a natural place for them. So this is one difference. There are several other differences between the Israeli Jewish settler colonialism and other settler colonialisms. one of these is the mythological, we would say, or the real connection of Jews to the land. I mean, it's also written in the Quran. I know that biologically we are not the descendants of our Avraham Avinu. Yeah, I know that I'm not. My father's name is Avraham, but there is no relation with no genetical relation with Avraham Avinu. I'm certain about that, without doing DNA. But still, we live in a time when religious mythology is very important. Every Muslim will tell you that Muhammad was in Jerusalem and flew to the sky, right? Now, if I tell them that I don't believe in it, they will be angry with me. So we are in times where mythology is very concrete in life. So nothing is the same like the same. So that's why we have very much to be, I don't know, with the Zen thinking or yoga thinking. Think about the now and how we improve the now and how we cannot undo things. I cannot do 1948. I can now only think about how to improve the now for the sake of the future. Yes, so these are all the different, I mean, and I think that those who chose the use of arms now against a very cruel Israeli regime did not take into consideration the historical circumstances, the nature of weapons, the position of the world. They did not take this into calculation. They took into calculation other things that might give Hamas the seniority and power within Palestinian politics, maybe within Arab politics, but not for the benefit of their people, and that's my opinion. Unbinary opinion.
Thank you. You have some questions, Sasha? No, okay. Is there any other questions? No. Well, what is your forecast on the indictments?
Now that's your
No.
that's your field. Look, I'm very careful not to prophesize and not to, my natural answer would be that my crystal ball is at home. I'm very disappointed. I am disappointed because in January, when we thought that we reached the unbearable stage of a genocide against Palestinians and the immense suffering in Gaza, I mean, really, that it came to the October, November, December, 4th month, we thought that, okay, it would halt it. And until now, they are still discussing. So as I told you yesterday, I have very little patience with legal terms and with legal procedures. And it's just too slow for us. It is just far too slow. And maybe I have to say something about imagination. If I can, at the beginning, I was very reluctant. I decided I will not say the word genocide from the start. First, there was also kind of, one can say it, the people in my paper thought that it was exaggerated, and it's not a term that should be used. But also because I don't want to dwell into legal arguments. So it's this point in this article or in this point. No, I don't want. So what I did, I described. And I described, for example, already in December, I described how it would be if Israel invaded Rafah and attacked Rafah. And one of my editors told me, and I didn't use the word genocide. One of the editors told me, he said, wow, from what you describe, I think about concentration camp. He meant Nazi times occupation, so concentration. And that's exactly what I wanted. I wanted to have people to make the comparisons without the definitions, and to be appalled by what I describe, not by a definition, but by the description. So I refuse to, yeah, thank you.
Just to say for the end, even if you get indictments and convictions, it doesn't solve all the problem if there is not a fair peace, and if there is no suppression of the
Settlers.
of the goals which are the source of those violence. So that's something I hope international actors into a peace process, if there is one, will remember, or we will try to remind them. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to you. Immensely. Thank you, Amira.